I already have my slab rolled out, so now I'm going to use the template to make my clay loom. And we are basically making a picture frame opening. So I'm going to hold this template down while I carefully cut around it with a clay cutting tool. And with clay, it's a good rule that we should not make things smaller than your pinky. So like that space there is getting really close to being too small. Those sizes are more likely to dry out and break when they have been fired. So if you've got an area that is smaller than your pinky, we can always add some more clay using score and slip to make that a little bit stronger. Again, anything smaller than your pinky is much more likely to break in the kiln as things dry out and heat up. So scoring and slipping is just scratching both pieces of clay and then brushing some of the slip on. We don't need a lot. And once I've pressed that in place, I'm going to use my finger and smooth it out. But that score and slip is going to keep it from falling apart in the kiln. Once I have my space cut out, I'm going to set this extra clay aside, and then I'm going to decide on the shape of the rest of my loom. Maybe I like the kind of wavy look that I have going, and so I purposely keep doing that. It's a good idea to draw in the clay before you cut. That way, if you don't like the marks that you've made, you can take your finger and just smooth it out and erase it. Once I've drawn my design, I'm going to cut out around that line. I'll set all my extra stuff aside. We can use that extra stuff to add decorations, or it can be squished back up and put back into the recycling clay bag. So that stuff is starting to dry out. Now that I have my shape cut out, there's a reminder on here that we should have an even amount of holes. When you do a rectangular weaving, you have to have an even amount. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, and so on. I wouldn't do any more than what's on here, so that's 2, 4, 6, because the smaller that the smaller the holes get, or closer the holes get together, the more likely it is to break. So we're going to use our pencil to make these holes, and we need to make sure they're not too close to the edge here, because again, that will also make it break. So once you've made the holes, you're going to have to lift it up, and you're going to have to make sure these holes go all the way through. And clay does shrink as it dries out and after it gets fired, so you need to keep that in mind because your yarn is going to have to be able to fit through these holes. If it breaks through the edge here, you will have to fix that by adding some clay with score and slip. And you cannot change this after it's been fired. So if your holes are not big enough for the yarn, there is no way to fix that. You'll have to end up wrapping your yarn around the clay loom. So once you've poked the holes, you're also going to want to make sure you smooth things out. Because when clay gets fired, it gets harder. It's also going to leave these little edges are going to be really sharp if we don't smooth them. So I just flipped this over, and I am using my hand to make sure that those are not going to be sharp edges, because sharp edges will actually end up cutting your yarn and your weaving will fall apart. So smoothing this out will also be really important. I'm using the pencil on the other side. Once you have everything smoothed out, there's no sharp edges, you know that the holes are going to be big enough to put yarn through, then it's good to have a board that you can put your clay on, because this will be a little bit fragile. Make sure your board fits. Mine does not, so mine's going to fall apart and get broken. Not a good choice on Mrs. Hayes's part. Once I've got this all cut out, I'm going to smooth edges here too to make sure nothing is sharp after it's fired. I can then start decorating. I can draw into the clay. I can press into the clay. You can try different textures. If you wanted to add three-dimensional items, we can do that with score and slip. So if I wanted to make some 3D things, maybe I wanted to make a clay flower on it, I would do that by scoring, slip, and I would keep adding three-dimensional things. At the end of class, if you're not done, you'll take a piece of paper and put your name and class on it. It will go inside of a Ziploc bag, so you'll take the entire board. Go get a bigger board if this is not the right size. You're going to make sure air is out of the bag. You're going to make sure it seals. And then this will go over on the clay cart. Make sure your name and class is visible through the bag. If it is all done, you're going to leave it out of the bag and you're going to let it dry out. When it's dry, Mrs. Hayes will fire it. After it's fired, we can paint it, and then you can create a weaving on your loom. Once your clay loom has been fired, we're gonna get crayons. You can choose some bright colors, color on your fired clay. You can color on both sides if you want. Make sure there is a spot somewhere for your name and class. You can do that in Sharpie, or you could even carefully write it in crayon so that we can read it. Once you have colored, you're going to get black tempera paint and you're going to add some water to it. You can even use the tempera paint cakes as well, but it needs to be kind of watery. And then what we're going to do is brush it on over the crayon. After I've brushed this on, you'll take it over to the sink and you're going to wash any extra paint off. Notice I'm also using a messy mat. This will help because you are going to end up getting paint all over the place. Okay, I washed off the extra paint. I'm just kind of blotting the water, and as soon as this is dry, you can get yarn and start setting up your loom, the warp strings across. And I'll be showing you that either one-on-one or in another video.